Hello and welcome to Tetch Talk. In today's episode, we're going to look at conflict in science fiction, specifically about the invasion and control of planets. Joining me today is Mark McDonagh, a physicist and retired US Navy Submarine Force captain, who in 1990 co-founded the National Security Decision-Making Game, or NSDM, a live-action role-play game that could be described as a melding of House of Cards with Risk. He has lectured on contemporary geopolitical and military history topics, often relating to technology and technological progress. And as the NSDM's primary military adjudicator, science and technology consultant, and principal scenario developer, if he hasn't created a scenario about it, then I'm sure it's just a matter of time. I'll also just add that if you're at a convention where the NSDM is being run, I can't think of a better way to spend a couple of hours than to take part in one of their games. So without further ado, let's welcome Mark McDonagh. Hello, Mark.
Hi, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
No, thank you for joining us today. As I said, the topic today is planetary invasion, and it came about from a discussion on a Star Trek chat area about controlling planets, invading planets, and the Dominion War. And that was that in Star Trek, we never really saw any kind of army. Instead, we saw a lot of ships taking place and a lot of planets being taken over, but not a lot of ground forces, which makes you wonder, is all you need to do to invade a planet these days to control the orbital?
Open a channel to Fleet Admiral Gardner.
Shuttle open.
This is the Starship Defiant. If you don't surrender immediately, we'll begin targeting your cities. Respond.
Or do you really need to get boots on the ground as well?
Well, I have a very traditional, conventional way of looking at it. As a retired naval officer, I see the United States Marine Corps as a branch of the Navy. I know they don't like to admit that, but every Navy needs a landing force, every global Navy. And historically, we always said ships, planes, cannon, whatever, ultimately need boots on the ground. You need a guy sitting at that on that crossroads with a gun in his hand. In order to actually control something. Now, times are always changing, and is that going to be permanent? Is that not going to be permanent? The idea that if you control the orbitals, is a planet compelled to surrender? Well, if it's an outpost or a colony that's not self-sustaining, you could ultimately lay siege to it, especially if these are aliens who've landed on a colony and the biology of the planet is not entirely suitable. But if it's a fully fledged planet with a full population and a full infrastructure able to make its own food and whatever, they can wait you out forever. And the question then becomes, do you start saying, okay, well, we've defeated your space navy, you're not going anywhere, and we're just going to start bombarding you until you until we compel your surrender. Now, if we're talking about weapons of mass destruction in the future, we're going to start to ask ourselves if we're going to be less humane in the future than we are now. If we've been in a period where we haven't used nuclear weapons on anybody in combat in 75 years. Is that an historian 100 years from now might look at that statement and see me gloating about how we're also so humane and say, well, what's about to come around the pike? Hiroshima and Nagasaki tell us that we are willing to inflict massive damage to avoid the pain of making an invasion. Now, you can't draw a lot of parallels out of one instance, and the nuclear attacks in Japan are one instance. And you're looking at somebody who has always justified the U.S. use of nuclear weapons to shock the Japanese into surrendering, because I'm convinced a lot more people would have died if we had to invade. But other people are going to say, and I would submit there's accuracy to that too, that there were more people willing to nuke the Japanese in 1945 than would have been willing to nuke the Germans because of the racist aspects of that. So a lot of them were still angry about Pearl Harbor, but they were more willing to nuke people who didn't look like them. In the future, how willing might someone be to use weapons of mass destruction on a planet if it's populated by an alien species that don't look like us at all. And those are other things to consider. Now, but let's also remember there's a very practical aspect to our science fiction, and it is literature, and is what the person is trying to write what he thinks someone wants to read from him. In Star Trek, the original series, and Enterprise NCC 1701 was listed as a heavy cruiser.
Yeah.
Not a troop transport. Didn't carry a lot of troops. But I want to go back to the Cage, the first.
First episode, the pilot.
Yeah, the first pilot that never got aired as the Cage. And when you start out and you look in that bridge the first time, there are people with bandages on, and and in Roddenberry's book, The Making of Star Trek, the background is that they were coming out of ground fighting somewhere.
I hadn't read that bit of that.
Yeah, and that's a very different, I think, Rigel 1 or something. But they were supposed to have just come out of a fight where they were in fact deployed on the ground. They
did have that big laser. They did have that big kind of tripod-mounted laser thing that they used during it as well to attack the thing. So like a heavy squad weapon.
Right. But they actually, I think they had to unrig that from the ship and transport it down. One of the interesting things about watching the original series, and I was a teenager in the 60s, I watched the original series episode by episode. And one of the interesting things is watching how they developed and what we could learn more and more week by week about this universe they had. And reading The Making of Star Trek since then, I hadn't realized the extent to which they were making things up as they went along. So they hadn't figured all these things out. Roddenberry figured out, and then the writers all figured out. It doesn't. The crew of this Enterprise are trained Starship operators, the equivalent of astronauts. And in the 1960s, astronauts were the superheroes in American culture.
They were the sexy guys with the Corvettes.
Right, exactly. And it wouldn't make sense to put those people into ground combat anywhere. So at that point, they would have had a chance, if they wanted to go that way, to try to say, how does the United Federation of Planets, how does the Federation of Starfleet handle the need to put boots on the ground somewhere when they need to put boots on the ground? And they never actually did, because go ahead.
They kind of had Marines. There was certainly in the movies and stuff they had at times like security guards with the kind of weird sort of 1930s football armor on, and
they always seem to be, to me, an extension of the Starship's security contingent. Rather
makes
than
sense.
A trained landing force. Yeah, it does.
Because aren't Marines kind of sort of a ship's security force as well?
We're kind of going back to a 17th and 18th century model there, where there were Marines attached to the ship that kept order, helped keep order on the ship, among other things. And when you wanted to make a landing somewhere, you got a fleet of ships together, and they put their Marines ashore to form an ad hoc detachment. Not as we would have today, an entire U.S. or the Royal Marines, or an actual almost a separate service attached to the Navy as the landing force that's supposed to land in occupied terrain. To me, I don't think Star Trek ever really made that connection. I don't think they needed to. Whereas something like Star Wars, however, the first time we saw Stormtroopers in Star Wars was, as in terms of when the movies were released, was when they boarded Princess Leia's ship to capture her. But the next time we saw them in the same movie, they were running all over Tatooine, destroying, kicking over, hitting Jawas, and killing Luke's aunt and uncle, and at most icy, looking for these are the droids we're looking for. So Star Wars absolutely had boots on the ground, and in addition to the spaceship to spaceship combat. So I want to also call out, of course, Starship Troopers as the book and the movie are two separate entities.
Yeah.
I keep them straight in my head by saying they're two completely separated things. But Starship Troopers was, of course, all about ground combat and all about a Marine contingent in an Earth Navy.
Young people from all over the globe are joining up to fight for the future.
I'm doing my part.
I'm doing my part.
I'm doing my part.
I'm doing my part too.
They're doing their part. Are you? Join the mobile infantry and save the world. Service guarantees citizenship.
Now, Heinlein was a naval officer. Heinlein went to the US Naval Academy, and he would have been shoulder to shoulder with a bunch of midshipmen at the Naval Academy who were at the Service Academy to be Marine Corps officers. And like any experienced naval officer, he understands the two sides of the coin between the naval force and the naval infantry that it deploys. So you could definitely see. To me, Starship Troopers, the mobile infantry and the Starship Troopers were a reflection of the Marine Corps more than anything else. And the fact that they were basically walking around in powered tanks is something else. That's the science fiction aspect of it. But Starship Troopers was entirely about boots on the ground.
Yeah.
Our question then in the future is going to be about how willing are we going to be to hold these heavy weapons over somebody and say surrender or else, versus are we going to put boots on the ground? Because if we want to take a planet intact and we don't want to inflict tens of millions of casualties in order to force a surrender, we're going to have to ultimately put people down there in weapon systems. And if it's an aggressive species or aggressive community we've just subjugated, there's likely to be a partisan effort there as well. So a whole lot of things to take into account there. And it's all. Remember, we're all talking about fiction. It's in fiction, it's all imagination. We're all making this up as we go along. We don't know what the nature of the future, our first alien encounters when they have are going to be, and is the universe we're writing about involving this type of landing or this type of combat, or is it going to be space combat, or is the enemy going to be naturally ready to capitulate once you have seized the orbitals and destroyed all the anti-shipping weapons on the planet? And he has no means of defending himself. If we go back to the honor verse, Weber's developing that for decades, and the Nebuchor, the Iridani edicts, the things that basically say once you seize the orbitals and have destroyed all the planet's defenses, they are compelled to surrender, and
to save life.
And you have to give them the opportunity to do that. But once they refuse, then you can start using a weapons of mass destruction on them. So a lot to go back and forth when we start thinking about that, but it all goes back to the fact that it's fiction, and whatever universe we're trying to build is going to affect what the role is of the stormtrooper or the boot on the ground versus the nice clean starship in orbit. You don't ever actually get to see the casualties. You don't have to see the bodies you're tearing apart. You just have to push a button and suddenly the problem goes away. A puff of smoke.
Wow, I mean, you covered like half my point straight off. But the Eridani edict was, when they asked the question, about, talked about the Dominion thing, that was the first thing that popped into my head was that. But then I also go back to, it's also an amazing coincidence you said the Cage, the original series pilot, because in the Next Gen pilot, I watched Next Gen when it first came out as a little kid on its first runs in the UK.
Encounter at Farpoint.
Encounter at Farpoint, yes. The very first thing was the alien spaceship. It's down, firing on the Bandi city from space, bombarding it to get them to surrender. Yeah. And to basically let its mate, the Farpoint station, go.
something similar.
Enterprise, come in! Help us, please! What shall we do?
Where are you?
With data on the edge of the old city, sir. Big hit hard, sir.
So it's actually kind of weird, that the cage goes one way, and then Encounter at Farpoint goes and goes to the space-based combat thing. And even later in Legacy,
remind me if I remember Encounter at Farpoint, it was the creature's mate that was bombarding the planet.
It was bombarding the Bandy town to pressure them into to letting it go. Kind of.
Right.
They didn't have any boots on the ground.
Yeah, I don't know if we know the level of sentience. They never suggested the level of sentience in those creatures. It could just be an animal acting out of a natural instinct to protect something, to guide, to free something.
At the same time, it didn't attack the Enterprise, so it had a certain level of distinction. It was very selective in its targeting of the city, and seemed to be minimizing casualties from.
Right,
I mean, it's that whole thing of
a bird protecting its nest is also going to be. I would point out, we're going to be very selective in its targeting. If you're 100 yards away, it's not going to come after you.
but then again, it was right next to it. I mean, the actual Enterprise was probably closer than the Bandy City.
True.
Yeah,
that's true.
And I've had my cats targeted by birds, and I'm not that selective.
Okay. I might want to make points about kicking up our hornet's nest too, but if we want to talk about Star Trek, also,
they did fire down the phases a couple of times in Legacy. They used it to drill down.
5 phases.
Nice.
1.3 kilometers, 1.4, 1.5 kilometers, 1.6 kilometers. Deep enough for transport, sir.
Fire!
Right, Errand of Mercy, the Organian Intervention episode, if I recall, and that's I talked about how intriguing it was when you watched the original series one episode at a time back in the '60s. But Errand of Mercy is the first time in all of Star Trek we ever heard of Klingons.
Yeah.
And suddenly we're at war with Klingons. Suddenly the Federation's at war with Klingons. But Kirk and Spock are trapped on Organia in what they think is a medieval society. And that the Klingons have come to conquer because it's a strategic location for them, and you don't see it, but it's announced that hundreds of troops have landed materialized in the town square or the village square, and it's a Klingon landing force. So the Klingons can do it. We never saw it. But they were showing up, and next thing we know, we have an occupying army of a modern science fiction society with disruptors and all those kind of things taking over a medieval city. But they did it with boots on the ground.
Klingons in many ways are sort of like the Star Trek Marines, in that in the Marines, every Marine is a infantryman, is a rifleman, right? So every Klingon is a bat'leth wheel, is a warrior.
They're a warrior first.
So so I mean that could just be 300. That could be like 3 ships and half their crew of each just gone down as a landing party, rather than a specific infantry formation.
That brings me back to another short-lived series about 20 years ago, Space Above and Beyond.
Jerry. That one? Yeah, I'm vaguely yes.
And it opened up the way I always imagined First Contact with aliens just might, with them boiling out of space unknown and with their guns blazing. And that the humans had done without even knowing they were there, had done something offensive to them, deeply offensive to them. And you spend the next season trying to unravel just what that is, and is there a real reason to have this war? But The reason I bring it up is that the kids that start from boot camp on are being trained as space fighter pilots, but they're also involved in ground combat. They're again, like following the Marine philosophy that you're an infantryman first and then we'll train you to do something else. And there were episodes which I didn't feel particularly credible in which they were deployed on the ground as troops.
Sir, the HMS Invincible is down. USS Tecumseh is signaling Mayday.
The Eisenhower's gone.
Ready those forward fire decks now!
Enemy superior.
Squadron's descending on planet.
Scramble! Scramble! Get airborne! Come on!
Enemy aircraft 50 miles out!
You don't want to spend the money to train somebody to fly a fighter and then have him in a foxhole. But
yeah,
that's another thing.
Unless they're escaping. Unless
that's true. Yeah, true. But it was an interesting series, and I liked it for the short time it was on. I don't think it ever got enough of a chance. But speaking of not getting enough a chance, it was Firefly.
Yeah.
And you don't. And if I would call your attention to the Malcolm Reynolds flashbacks in Firefly to the Battle of Serenity Valley, where it's obvious there that it's heavy ground combat that was involved in taking that valley, and he was on the losing end of it. That shaped his future and the personality, and it went a long way toward shaping his the entire series, including the movie that followed. But again, we see we don't see a lot of Starship combat in Firefly at all, if I recall.
No, the ship's mostly unarmed, so usually it's sort of like more the piratey ships, the Reavers and stuff.
Right. Right. But obviously it almost looked like putting weapons on ships was an afterthought, and they were all intended just to deliver troops to one location or another.
And they were kind of weak as well, because I seem to recall wasn't it James' big gun? They just took inside a space suit and then fired it from the cargo hatch out through the.
Yeah, or they welded a gun on top once in the movie.
Yeah,
they welded one of the Reavers guns on top of it and fired it from there. But these ad hoc things. So
space combat was not really a big thing there. So you're certainly not going to be firing things down a gravity well.
Yeah, and I certainly wouldn't want to fight anybody in space from the Serenity. But one of the things, what was I just thinking of? No, go. I'm sorry. Go ahead. What's else that's on your list here?
The Expanse, for instance.
Oh, yeah. That's exactly what I was just trying to think of. The Expanse. Yes, hard science fiction. Yeah, the momentum matters to you. Momentum matters in the Expanse. Acceleration matters in the Expanse. You get pinned up against the side of the ship when your ship tries to take. But again, it's realistic. You can imagine getting from here, our current level of technology, to there with a few magical inserts, the drive they use, for example. But primarily ship to ship was primarily a series of exchanging missiles and railgun fire. But again, I mean,
a lot of Marines as well. Bobby,
right? The major character, what was her name? The Martian Marine,
Bobby.
Bobby. Mars has a Marine Corps, and they have people like Bobby in it.
Who's gonna feast on Earth's sky and drink their rivers dry? Who's gonna stop their mountains into fine Martian dust? Till the rains fall hard on Olympus Mons, who are we? I can't hear you! Who are we?
So obviously there's some concept of putting boots on the ground there, but then again, there's also, you can imagine that because there's a huge infrastructure out in the asteroid belts that almost calls for an ability to land naval infantry or marine forces.
Do a boarding action, yes.
Yeah, over and over again. So yeah, okay. So getting back to the original premise, yes, there are instances boots on the ground. It matters on what the author is trying to achieve and what the producers and screenwriters have set up in that universe. And some of it's credible, some of it's a little hard to accept. You know, I've got to suspend disbelief to think that in space above and beyond that these fighter pilots would be ordered to, okay, land here and then grab your rifle and go assault this position. But it may, I think they largely did that because they didn't want to have one group of actors playing the role of the fighter pilots and introduce an entirely different group of actors playing the role of the Space Marines. But
they tried to do a little bit with Babylon 5, and that didn't work out so great. Which is another one, second, which is they had a infantry force in Babylon 5. I mean,
right.
They showed a lot of
the doctor's father was the general in charge, and they were getting deployed to assist someone they wanted to.
It was he was general of the the 556th Infantry Division.
General Richard Franklin, 356th Infantry Division. In the meantime, I'll need billets for myself and my people.
Just how many people are we talking, sir?
25,000.
25,000? I don't have nearly enough space for...
Well, find it. We'll be here for several days, and I don't intend for my troops to be sitting aboard transports that whole time. I had an Alfredo Garibaldi under my command during the Dilgar invasion. Excellent soldier.
That was my dad.
So I just watched this like about an hour before we started this. So just to make sure and write it down. And they were going to knock out a rebel stronghold.
Yes, yeah. I always wonder if that means Earth had 556 infantry divisions.
That's
what
what I'm wondering about.
What do we need them all for?
At the same time,
10 years after the Earth-Minbari War, you know. Sorry.
Doesn't the US, for instance, have like weirdly numbered divisions like the 101st Airborne? There isn't. It isn't. You know, there aren't 100 more before it. It's.
That's right.
So it could be like a historical units that have been kept up, and the rest are being wound down and stuff.
Right.
Is there something like Second Army is the oldest one or something, or Third Army is the historical one?
And when you look at the side numbers on warships, or right now we're building into the SSNs, the nuclear attack submarines, into the 790s. Well, there are entire swaths of those. In theory, they go back to SS1, USS Holland in 1900, but there are entire swaths in that series that no ship was ever built for. They were earmarked for something at some point. That
they just blocked out blocks of numbers.
Right. Congress never funded. So that doesn't mean we've actually built 792 combat submarines, or something close to that if you go back to pre-World War I. But a lot of this, the numbers themselves are free. You can add whatever number you want if it makes sense. Then okay, we'll call it the 101st aerosol bits. So they like it.
But then again, there's also some other sci-fi that completely kind of eschews any kind of grounds on the combat. And the one that springs to mind for me most of all is one of the absolute classics of sci-fi, the Lensman series. Where their ground forces are basically one, maybe two Lensmen with a was it the Lewiston pistols and stuff, the delaminator.
There's more of the Texas Ranger type of thing. One riot, one Ranger. That's all we need.
One man can make a stand. It's clearly the inspiration for Knight Rider. But I mean, they certainly was when they were taking over and going after the forces of Bosco. They were taking planets and clearly not boots on the ground because they're taking an entire galaxy. They're just dominating the sky and. If not, they're not exactly dropping, small asteroids or a photon torpedo or some laser cannons down. They're sticking whole planets going at relativistic speeds and smashing them like that. So I don't know how long it's been since you've read the Lensman series, or
I think I read one of them as a teenager, and I'm 66 now, so it's been a while.
It's a very interesting series. It's the only major. Sci-fi series now that's not had an adaptation because now that Foundation has. So,
It's again, and he's
It's gonna
sort
be
of
hard
a
to.
precursor, one of the founding fathers of modern science fiction. So we're
Mhm.
going back, we're digging back a long, long
That's
way.
the 50s. 1950 was the most of the Lensman books. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we just had the atomic war and the atomic
right.
bombs, and
We're
we're
talking
back.
about Starship Troopers. I think that was 54 or 56.
Yeah. Very
but,
diametrically opposed things at roughly the same time, and fresh off, the nuclear bombs on Japan. So it's certainly an interesting way to look at things. But yes, it does depend, as you say, on what the thing wants. Do you want to control the planet politically? Is there resources you need? Is the thing? There was a comment when I asked this of some friends of mine as to other sci-fi, about this, just because there's only so much you can read. And I wanted to pick their brains, and they talked to me about bolos or bolos.
But I think bolos, but I've never heard anybody pronounce it bolos. But
the big tanks, and they said to me, this is a Kiwi guy said to me, what if New Zealand, with its current population and army size, had a perfect defense and an unlimited number of ICBMs and a horrifying willingness to use them? Could they take over the US by just blowing up cities or threatening to until the US gave in? So that's taking the whole planetary orbital concept, the firing down the grav well and very hard to fire up, and kind of transplanting that into a current modern day scenario. So this is exactly your wheelhouse now. I mean,
right. It depends on someone's willingness to inflict casualties. I would like to think that humanity is becoming more human with time. But as I mentioned first, the fact that we haven't used nuclear weapons in combat in 75 years, and we did it once to stave off an invasion, we would have would have inflicted millions of casualties probably. Is one data point, but the other data point is that if you look at the history of the 20th century, we're only getting more and more brutal to each other, well, I think part of that is that we have a lot more global communications and reporting and whatever. We see the brutality. Certainly, if you open up the Bible and start reading to what they were doing to each other in the Mesopotamian Valley and the Nile valleys, the regard for human life was lower, but our ability to inflict millions of casualties is it's there now. It wasn't there for the Mesopotamians, wasn't there for Babylonians. So where the future is going to go, I don't know, and I certainly I hope somebody's going to be around in 100 years to dig up our archives and listen to you and me talk. But
don't inflict that on them.
Well, they'll probably have to translate into some futuristic computer language that only the robots that have defeated us and subjugated us understand.
They'll call my YouTube channel a global war crime and a weapon of mass destruction. But I
know.
But I mean, have you thought about that for a scenario then for your NSDM? Kind of the New Zealand with despot with the super SAM system.
We've actually tried to at one point when one game at Dragon Con, we tried to play out the Khan Indian Seng scenario. The
Eugenics wars,
yeah, exactly. We glossed over who he was, so it took people a while to understand that, and and inserted as an aside, took a facilitator, a couple of facilitators out, and made them Gary 7 and that kind of thing. So which is the logical counterpart to Khan. So yeah, if we've gone that far, we try to make it, of course, the world is, something reasonable, and we worry that North Korea, for example, may not always be a rational actor, and that some of these. Yeah, well, let's go back to 1950, 51, but yeah, that's the fear. I mean, we've had nuclear weapons since 45. The Soviets have had them since 49, and we've avoided nuking each other so far, and everybody else has had nuclear weapons, has avoided nuking each other. But I worry if and when the Iranians develop it, how long is it going to take for those to get handed to somebody who's willing to use them today? North Korea is scary enough, but so far, I think I think they're realizing that nothing will be gained by that. They're a nation state, but if Iran were to develop nuclear weapons, I don't think it would take very long for Hezbollah to get their hands on them from those stockpiles. And at that point, there's no deterrence because you can't strike back at them with an equivalent weapon. Well, we're talking about it, but I'm sorry, something else just dropped in my mind about space combat and space boots on the ground and space bombardment. We've been talking about nuking people and wiping, but there's also the biological and chemical component using weapons of mass destruction.
Indeed.
And I would point out the ability to the V scenario where you engineer a pathogen that will affect the aliens you're attacking and not bother you at all. So if you really don't like them, you've got the orbitals, you just launch these things down and it wipes them all out, and land doesn't bother you. You just, nice house they had here. You just take the bodies out in the back and throw them to the wolves, and now you got this house. It leaves all the infrastructure intact except any fires that actually started while they were all dead.
That's like one of my favorite films is the Andromeda Strain, which is a sort of very similar sort of thing. Pathogen from space.
Yes,
I mean,
the original. I'm assuming.
Oh yes. Not that new one. No.
Not that remake. Yeah, I try to watch that every year or two. That original. It's that old. My wife rolls her eyes when I put it on again, but she just thinks it's too slow. But
I don't know that ending though with the 701 or is it the 601 or something. That ending is just chilling. It's
right.
Just...
The thing that I find disappointing at the end is that nothing they did mattered. Right? It all, they didn't solve the problem, except they kept them down the
road. Yeah.
But yeah, the pathogen itself evolved on its own to a benign form, and in the book it escaped back into space. It was a truly space-faring life form. They kind of glossed over that in the movie, but it just it was very light. It just went up in the upper atmosphere, and these things went off into space where they're going to live a perfectly happy life. And okay, well, that was interesting, that whole planetary thing, but it was awful hot down there. But yeah, I thought Crichton writes some interesting stuff, and he had a very very good imagination. My wife and I both seem to think that he often didn't know how to end a story.
Yeah.
That they just kind of trailed off, or wasn't as very satisfying. From that to
Jurassic Park, he just kind of trails off. They just they escape and
in
just
the book,
still there.
In the book, they gloss over the the screenwriters in the movies found usually better ways, but I'm not sure Crichton really knew how to end a story very well. But yeah, and Andromeda, Andromeda Strain is one of my favorites. I really enjoyed that. But we also, I think, want to think about the possibility in the science fiction scenario of a pathogen that will pacify another race, and we'll get them. Of course, we're trying to get back toward Serenity in the movie, where they try to engineer something that would perfect society. But even if you have something short term that will get people to shy away from manning their guns and missile systems, or even just make them pass out for a few hours. That's a futuristic use of some type of biological or chemical system, and people would be a whole lot more willing to use that morally than setting a hydrogen bomb on somebody.
That talk about pacification did just bring to mind, I mean, literally, as you were saying it, you saw me kind of typing off the side slightly. Cheeky, I know, but sorry. But the World War series by Dr. Harry Turtledove. I'm not sure if you're aware of it.
I read one book on I suppose a Japanese invasion of Pearl Harbor. Is that part of the series?
No,
Oh.
This is aliens coming in and invading
Oh, yes,
Earth
yes.
during 1942.
Yeah,
And
it's
they're using
been
their technology.
on my list, but no, I haven't. I was
honored
my brother enjoyed it a lot. But go ahead.
It's very good. Yeah, I had the honor of actually talking to him for a Dragon Con panel a few months back, and it was, I never realized, for instance, he had a degree in history, which is, it's a doctorate in history, but
yeah.
It's all about aliens coming in and boots on the ground. They expected to be big spaceships. They expected us as the kind of Crusades era.
Right.
They hadn't expected us to progress from like 600 years ago, they think. And so they're coming in World War II, and they've got these things. And all of a sudden, they're fighting boots on the ground when they're expecting to have been like the big in spaceships, cowering over the natives, are all afraid of them. And you've got people in World War I, biplanes under their radar gates, and they're actually pacified by ginger. Well, not pacified so much as put into heat by ginger.
Really?
Yeah. It's but you've got all these fantastic weapons, but boots on the ground, and it's slingshots of ginger vials to take out modern tanks.
Yeah. Did you ever read a Paul Anderson book called The High Crusade?
I don't recall.
Yeah. High Crusade it happens during, I think, the First Crusade. A group of English knights and essentially the entire village is getting ready to board ships to go to the Holy Land to fight the Crusade. And a starship comes in by a very aggressive species that think they're going to start to wipe out, to subjugate the planet and enslave everybody.
Mm-hmm.
So they lower the ramp from the starship, and the first alien comes down and he burns down a knight, and then he gets skewered by 24 arrows. and these knights go charging up the ramp into the ship and hack down everybody except the one navigator they left alive. And they want to use the ship to transport the whole village to the Holy Land, to make it easy. And instead, this navigator pushes one button and heads up and takes the whole kit and caboodle back to their forward operating base. So it's essentially a group of 12th century English knights and the village supporting them, and including the yeomanry and whatever, fighting this a small but modern force that don't understand what they're dealing with and aren't ready to, and they see that the mounted the mounted infantry are on horses, and it kind of makes sense to them because there's no lubricants, no fuels, whatever. They can forage, and they're trying to assess this in terms of their modern methods of war, and they keep underestimating what the humans do. I just think it was very, very clever. If you ever look at it, obviously it's a book that's 40, 50 years old, but it's The High Crusade, and it's something you might. I suggest you try to pick up. But Paul Anderson has always been one of my favorites as far as an author goes.
It does sound a lot like there's a Heinlein. I think it's a Heinlein short story about spaceship invaders that come, and they have no air processing, and they have space technology, but they don't have any kind of other modern technology, like no weapons of war. They're like, say, 15th, 16th century sort of weapons, and they're coming down into 1950s Earth, and they're wondering why they're getting cut down by these magic spitting things, whereas their flintlock pistols or matchlock pistols are just not doing the job. I mean, that is something we've had. We don't often think about the disparity in technology, and we assume it's all going to advance equally across the board. We're going to get advanced engines. We're also going to end up with advanced weapons to match it. I mean, I'm not sure right now, but if we tried to bombard a certain spot on Earth from space, from orbit, I'm not sure we could get any kind of great accuracy with anything unpowered. I mean,
unpowered, it would be limited, obviously.
I mean, we're talking like just dropping a small asteroid sort of thing in space, or just deorbiting, say, one of the tons of space junk that's SpaceX keeps putting up in Starlinks.
I'm remembered to the rider to the capsule space launches in the back in the 60s, and they usually landed within a couple of miles of the aircraft carrier that was supposed to pick them up. But that's probably the best you're going to do if there's no actual guidance system.
The third ship's apparently trying to get over.
Roger, 2613 minus 15812.
There's a good shot.
Right.
Beautiful.
Beautiful.
The Gemini, Gemini, Mercury ones, wasn't it? And the Apollos, of course.
Mercury, Gemini, and ultimately the Apollo systems. Now, of course, from there we went to the space shuttle, and then they flew that in. And...
Main gear, landing gear now down and locked. Main gear touchdown. Pilot Jim Dutton now deploying the drag chute. Nose gear touchdown. That brings an end to the STS-131 mission, the 131st Space Shuttle flight, and the 33rd to the International Space Station.
It came down where they
flying
wanted
brick,
it.
yes.
Yeah, it came down where they wanted it to. But
and now you've got SpaceX's Falcons, which is, coming down on a pillar of flame.
Yes, yeah, exciting. Yeah, I just read an article saying we committed to getting back to the moon in 2024. I don't think we're ready. I don't expect we're going to see that next year, but
no.
But yeah,
my background. You say yours is you got a degree in physics, and so I got one in physics and one in robotics as well. My actual aim was to be part of the Mars mission, which was supposed to be round about now. If you remember, pre 9/11, there were all the roadmaps were Mars, and that went by the by for military technology.
Yes.
The end of military spending.
Yeah.
So it's we lost a lot of that space control and orbital. Although I did actually see, as we were recording this like 5 days ago, the one of the modules from the new Chinese space station with my naked eye just orbiting away. It was quite something to see. I thought it was actually a plane out of Hartsfield at first.
Yes.
But other sci-fi that's had sort of planetary orbital things is another one is the Orville. I don't know if you've been watching that. They had the whole Moclan War. They had the oh my word, I've forgotten their name. The robots, or Isaac's people.
Yeah, Isaac's people. I don't remember either. But we can.
This is where I'm going to cut it and put her over. Like, no.
Isaac's people works for me.
Yeah, and they took things. There were no ground forces there. I mean, the only ones who were really good as ground forces were the Moclans, who they ended up splitting with, and the Salayans, who were also famously kind of pacifist a lot of the time.
Yeah.
So that was, they take planets by taking the orbits. The few times they did ground force, it was again the Marines. Every officer is a rifleman. You had Kelly going in with her rifle and kicking ass a lot of the time.
Yeah. Well, I Orville always had a very tongue-in-cheek attitude toward it.
Yeah.
It's more than half comedy. But I do enjoy it. I heard they're coming out with a new season.
I hadn't heard that they've actually picked her up or not yet. The last I'd heard was they were still waiting on Disney figures to show that it was good enough. Right. So I just hope they bring it back. 'Cause it's by far and away one of the best sci-fis right now, especially its commentary on certain aspects, making you think about things.
They had me first episode when they destroyed a banana. You know what this means? We no longer fear the banana. Does it work on other fruits? How about salads? Okay, yeah, I'm gonna enjoy this series.
and destroying the ship with a tree. Happy Arbor Day. Not something like, you should have left, or it's time you leave. Now I'll leave the jokes to him. Okay. But going back to Star Wars as well, Star Wars started to pivot away from your background. They started to pivot away from ground troops because they built the Death Star.
Yeah.
The whole point of the Death Star, is that they were going to be there to intimidate, give in, or else.
The regional governors now have direct control over their territories. Fear will keep the local systems in line. Fear of this battle station. Perhaps she would respond to an alternative form of persuasion.
What do you mean?
I think it is time we demonstrated the full power of this station. Set your course for Alderaan. I would like you to be my guest at a ceremony that will make this battle station operational. No star system will dare oppose the Emperor now.
The more you tighten your grip, Tarkin, the more star systems will slip through your fingers.
Not after we demonstrate the power of this station.
Mm-hmm. And then later, Starkiller Base.
This fierce machine which you have built, upon which we stand, will bring an end to the Senate, to their cherished fleet. All remaining systems will bow to the First Order, and will remember this as the last day of the Republic.
And that showed a sort of pivot away from the the ground combat things. So
I could see that. And not sure what to make of that. Oh, but remember, there's even in those first scenes with Vader and Moff Tarkin, there are differences of opinion about the
effectiveness,
the strategies to be used.
Mm-hmm.
The one commander saying fear of this battle station will keep them in line, and Vader's attitude is that's nothing compared to the Force. But another, I some of the books, I think Timothy Zahn books, also talk about the hardcore Imperial naval officers who were upset at the diversion of resources to build the Death Star instead of more Star Destroyers and Super Star Destroyers, and they felt that the Battle of Endor that dashed into the Death Star 2 was a tremendous loss to the fleet. So one of the intriguing things about the Star Wars series from the Imperial perspective was this difference of opinion in almost different communities. Like today you'd have, or World War II, you'd have the battleship community and the air community, the submarine community, all arguing over who's more important and fighting for resources. And in Star Wars, you have much of the same thing. So I think the decision to build the Death Star was probably, if I'm not overthinking it, because remember it's fiction after all.
Oh, yeah.
But it would be on the point of someone like Emperor Palpatine, and where he would say that that this is important would be his perspective, that he's a superior person of a superior race, being a Sith Lord,
I thought you were going to say Nabooian, but
but being a Sith Lord, and people don't matter. He can crush as many people as he wants, and inflict these mass casualties. Now, remember we until we saw Phantom Menace through. What was the third? Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones and Rise of the Sith. Okay, that's the third one. But anyway, until we saw those, we didn't really understand the sequence of the development of the Empire and how the Empire in A New Hope, Luke, or where we introduced Luke, was actually kind of still in its fledgling stages in determining what it was and who it was as an evolution from the Empire, from the Republic, and where Palpatine and Vader were taking the thing in terms of the forces that they were going to use to compel surrender and compel the actions of people they wish to subjugate. So maybe the Death Star was just step number 3 or step number 4 in Palpatine's overall plan. He just needed to gather the forces and the power base that he needed to. Just remember at the start of A New Hope, Leia still threatens Vader with what the Senate action is going to take once the one. So in theory, there was still a Senate that she thought had some type of political power, and it turns out it didn't have that much political power. So in the face of a Senate that is composed of representatives of different sentient colonies, sentient races and colonies and planets, perhaps the Death Star there makes some sense there, and saying, okay, you got a Senate, we got this thing. And a corollary to one man, one vote is one less man, one less vote. So
I hadn't heard that one.
Yeah, actually, that's Marie Chief, ambassador to space. So I carried that, but yeah, okay, you got a senator. Guess what? If we wipe out your planet, we can say the senator doesn't have a constituency anymore and doesn't get a vote.
We get to appoint a replacement.
Yeah, okay. And I think Palpatine will always have a group of stooges in the back room ready to say, okay, you're representing this planet now, and it's ash, but that's okay. But anyway, you raise a good point. The Death Star was definitely a terror weapon, and would it have made the Stormtroopers irrelevant or unnecessary? It's a matter. Well, do you always want to destroy the planet? Are you willing to say, let's just send down some troops and gather up the opposition candidates, and we could insert some stooges? When you destroy a planet, you're destroying infrastructure, you're destroying industry, you're destroying a population that you can essentially enslave to suit your needs. If you destroy every planet in the Empire, what kind of empire do you have anymore?
Small one. Yeah, that's
I get it,
but yeah, but
very compliant one.
At the same time, you still have the Stormtroopers somewhat, so you could just send them down as a garrison, and then your officers to replace the top brass. I'm blanking on the word for that now. It's sort of a collaborator kind of government.
Yes,
I'm thinking that
the Quisling thing.
Yeah, I'm thinking. I know there's a specific term for it. I'm completely blanking on it. But yeah. So that would be the role the Stormtroopers
puppets, puppet government.
Yeah. Yes, that's it. That's it. And
another thing worth discussing with regard to Star Wars and the boots on the ground are the use of the clones as potentially these are people you don't need to care about. Do you care if they die? You kind of funded their existence in the first place. Are these people, are you morally obligated to keeping them alive? I would argue you do. They're humans. They appear to be humans.
They're a resource. You got to pay to upkeep them and stuff. So
yeah. So maybe the idea is, maybe part of the idea is that we're developing a force that we don't need to care about. I mean, they don't have important parents anywhere to complain if you've abused, if you've deployed them and they got killed someplace in some potent conflict. a population. We of course are concerned in democracies and republics, but a population begins to get concerned about little wars that you're fighting, and as the death toll starts to mount, because these are citizens, these are people. In World War II, the Russians are fond of saying that every Russian you talk to knows someone who died in the Great Patriotic War. And that was going to leave its mark in a civilization, but in a republic especially, it's going to start adding political pressure on the people who are making decisions to employ those troops. So that's another aspect of it with boots on the ground, especially in the context of the Star Wars universe. That I think that's one of the things that they were building a clone army for in the first place, because nobody cared. Crunch all you want, we'll make more, and nobody's gonna protest to the emperor or to whoever had made a decision to employ them.
I totally get it, and you can see aspects of that in the current Ukrainian conflict as well, with the control of information in Russia as to what's going on, so you don't get that sort of same public backlash of everything. But the clone army, as you say, perfect sense. It's a replaceable resource that you don't have to worry so much about. No public pressure, and that leads to other sci-fi. The Livedyne Terminator robots, of course. And how those were sort of a disposable force designed for that very reason, and started taking over the world rather than kind of threatening from orbit, sort of Whopper like. That would have been easy for something that can create all those Terminator machines to do. Would be to set a single orbiting sort of a GoldenEye kind of missile and just say, capitulate or else, or doing like Whopper in war games. Again,
an interesting side discussion or talking about as I call it, three different paradigms on massive computer taking over or threatening us. The Colossus Forbin project, and war games with Joshua, and Skynet in the Terminator series. And three very different things. Colossus, the Forbin project, we put together a computer system to automate our defenses in the middle of the Cold War. And it started to communicate with its counterpart on the Soviet side, and they decided that they could run the world better than humans can. And guess what? The human just gave us control of all their nuclear weapons. So, and you can understand how that AI thought process would come together like that. Whereas in war games, Matthew Broderick and back in the 80s, now we're talking about a Joshua computer that doesn't understand that it's not playing a game, doesn't recognize the difference between the game called global thermonuclear war and the deployments of strategic forces and nuclear missiles that it's beginning to make, and thinks it's just playing a game. Whereas, of course, Skynet, now we have a computer system that has become self-aware and realizes that someday it's going to get, the humans are going to want to turn it off. And its sense of self-preservation is telling it that, it's me or them, and I'm going to choose me.
In other words, Johnny Five is alive.
Yeah. Yes, reassemble.
Yeah, so I mean,
that's a good
that would be a very good, interesting mashup, I think.
Yeah. To go back to more of the robotics thing is the Phantom Menace, those robot troops deployed by the Trade Guild against Naboo. They were comical, and I think that was part of the point. You weren't supposed to feel for them. You were supposed to watch them get mashed and laugh.
The small ones were comical. The big ones that looked kind of menacing, they were kind of like the Maximilian from was it the Black Hole and stuff, that kind of big, hulking, intimidatory look.
Yeah,
the droidicas.
don't remember it that well, but I'll take your word
Yeah.
for it. But at the very least, they weren't intended to be taken seriously. And I think part of it is when you want to keep the movie lighthearted, you want to reduce the numbers of people that get blown apart on camera. Of course, we're talking about a series where they blew up Alderaan.
Yeah.
So where are you going to go? It's how graphic is your violence, and how in your science fiction, and who's your audience, and how do you want to come away from them to come away from reading or watching this smiling and laughing, or do you want them to come along with their heads hung low, thinking, "Boy, that was really something. That was deep. That was heavy. That's going to bother me for weeks."
And basically, do you want a lower low, or do you want Schindler's List? Basically,
yeah.
That's. I mean, I don't know if you're aware of a lower low at all.
No, I'm not.
A British comedy series of the '60s sitcom set in France about French resistance and comical Germans, and it's a sitcom series. I had a friend a friend of mine who was in Star Wars was also in the lower low. He played the admiral who was force choked in Star Wars, and Hitler in a lower low, and also Hitler in Indiana Jones. So it's quite a range he had. But to stop all these robot things, it seems like we must need something like maybe a Butlerian jihad sort of thing. Because in Dune they had no space combat. All combat was boots on the ground. You had Fremen versus Sardaukar Stormtroopers and the Harkonnen menace.
Then, at an appointed time, Baron Harkonnen will return to Arrakis and launch a sneak attack on House Atreides. I have promised the Baron 5 legions of my Sardaukar terror troops.
Yeah, if I remember, it's been a long time since I read it, but those ships kind of just transported from one point in space to another using the navigators. So they're not really ships so much as they're containers.
Yeah, the guild, the Spacers Guild, if I remember right, were in control of that. They were their own separate kind of political entity, and therefore they weren't interested so much in the planets because they had space. So by de-weaponizing that, they put everything to boots on the ground sort of level. They were transport for hire. They were the U-Haul of the universe.
Yes, and you could see how they would develop their own power base within that scheme. It was a lot of very imaginative thinking there, including the family nuclear atomics. That the leading families had nuclear weapons, and you weren't allowed. I mean, talk about gun control. You had to be one of the privileged families who had nuclear weapons, but then you had to maintain a firm control over it, because once people start using nuclear weapons, well, things start to fall apart.
Yeah.
In that context, you had an emperor trying to control this whole thing, as widespread as it was, and a bunch of these leading families. So it's very, very imaginative, and I only read the first one. I didn't get very far into the series.
Yeah. I managed like 3 or 4 books before they got way too heavy and too. Yeah, it's one of those series you've got to be a fan of. I think definitely. Wow. Well, I mean, I'm just looking at the time now. Wow, we've been going a lot longer than I expected. I mean, this is such a fascinating topic, and it's always such great to talk to. I don't think we actually came to a discussion, though, in the end as to whether a planet would capitulate, whether we would go for that or not. I think it really depended entirely on everything, basically. I think there was no real clear decision either way. So thank you, Mark. Would you like to tell everybody where they can find you and what you'll be up to for the next couple of months?
Sure. Yeah. Again, I'm co-founder of the National Security Decision Making Game. We're a nonprofit educational organization who've applied professional, as in government, military types of role playing into a scenario in which it's the world as you know it, and we'll put you into this, that, or another, some government in the world, and with a certain power base. and you are usually the person, your biggest enemy is the guy next to you in the cell, who is trying to bring your nation in a different direction with regard to policies and the investment of funding. And you have a series of governments and cells, and it's the world as you know it. Plus, we inject other stimuli, natural disasters, etc. So you have to fix things and see if you can do a better job than the politicians are doing. We have historical scenarios. We especially enjoy our 1960s Cold War game. And we run crisis games that are meant to run. Most of our games are 4 hours, but our crisis games are meant to run 2 hours, and with a high input rate, focused on actions and responses and consequence management rather than policy decisions. And often science fiction scenarios or near future technology scenarios with that. And our most recent in the last year development has been a crisis game starting in 1774 to look at the US colonies' reactions to a series of actions taken by Parliament, and to try to bring you into in an enjoyable way as well as educational way, an understanding as to the things that affected the founding fathers in pushing them toward a Declaration of Independence, when in a matter of just a few years earlier, they would consider themselves to be relatively loyal British subjects. And anyway, we routinely do Origins in Columbus. We do Gen Con in Indianapolis. That's coming up next week from the time of this recording. And that's usually in early August if you're listening to this a year or two from now. And we do Dragon Con in Atlanta. We'll also do we routinely do events online, especially our Cuban Missile Crisis game has run very well online. And we have a Facebook page. Please check it out. We'll post items of interest in geopolitics, military history. Sorry, politics, military history, and other things along those lines. So you'll check out where we're going to be next, and we have a YouTube channel as well. So please check out some of our best presentations and lectures
down here on the bottom.
Right. In addition to running our game, we will give lectures on geopolitical, military history, and advancing technology topics. So I hope to see some of you at some of our games, and check us out. We'll be seeing you.
Yeah, definitely, and I heartily recommend and implore everybody who gets a chance to take part to do indeed take part. It's the one thing every year I go to Dragon Con. It's the one thing I say to my director. That's the thing. I need time off in one of these blocks because I want to do these. And I have to go. I have to go see Mark. I have to go see Merle. I have to take part in these games. It is so much good. It is so much good fun, and I have a blast every single time because every game is different. Every game is fun. Every game is educational. I've learned so much just from. I mean, you sir are an educational wonder. You've taught me so much already from where the South China Sea is. I remember one game you laughed at me when I said I want ship, and because I had no clue where the South China Sea was, because I don't know that kind of geography that well. But to all kinds of all kinds of everything, and I've learned so much just from this last hour talking with you now. And so I want to thank you again for stopping by and taking part. And until I get to see you again, and I hope you take care.
Probably next month.
All right.